Can I move closer?
Yes, everyone can move closer. Hi, welcome to Big River Bindery. This is the Letterpress Alliance annual get-together where we share things. It's sort of a skill share, but not. We're just showing the show and tell of the things that we love and what we do, which of course all surrounds letterpress and the technologies that are used in the technique of letterpress printing. So I brought in a whole bunch of interesting little tidbits. I'm going to show you how to carve a wood engraving block. I'm going to talk a bit about the tools and techniques in the process. I'm going to show you some historical pieces, and I'm going to show you some prints that and the blocks that made them. And I'm going to show you my Mary Pickford book, which was completely printed letterpress and bound in Japanese Asahi silk. Don't let me go on a tangent on something else. I brought in some books too to show, including Ink and Paper, which is a new book about my my printmaking over many years since the 1970s. Anyways, let's get started by looking at the process of wood engraving. Wood engraving, of course, goes back to Thomas Bewick in the 18th century, who was a silversmith. And he recognized early on that you could do an incredible detail in the end grain of wood. And he was doing gun butts and things like that and working on silver. And there was a printing problem at the time. You couldn't get a lot of detail in a block without great effort. And there was a need for images of incredible detail, a demand by the public to accompany text. So for printing things like encyclopedias. But what Bewick's major innovation was the history of quadrupeds, which was, I think, his first book, which was an illustrated history of all the four-legged animals in the UK. Now, we should remember that wood engraving and relief printing was not invented by Thomas Bewick. He's accredited with wood engraving, which is a different process. It's like relief printing was not invented by Gutenberg, and movable type is accredited to him, but there were other innovations that happened earlier, but he gets the credit for it. For many reasons. One is that he invented a way of making the type one character at a time and casting it. He had the innovation of the wine press, which he transformed into the printing press, and these innovations led to what we know as letterpress printing. I've got an early wood engraving from it looks like some partridges. This could be by Thomas Bewick, but I have no way of knowing. It's not signed by Bewick, but if we can just maybe pull it up close to actually show the detail in this engraving. It's pretty incredible the amount of detail that you can get into the end grain of a piece of boxwood. This is boxwood, which is grows like a hedge. It takes about 100 years to grow boxwood block about that big, and so it's an expensive material. By the middle of the 20th century, you had them making little computer components, engraving those on wood. By 1850, they could engrave photographs on the end grain of wood. And you can see here this wonderful little wheelbarrow block. Oh yes, I'm catering to this machine because of our robot overlords.
One come up and see this later.
Yes, but I don't want to upset them in case the AI decides to rewrite me. Right? Here's a wonderful little engraving block too. I'll hand this around so you can actually get a better look. But this has type on it, and it's like 6-point type, all hand carved out of a piece of boxwood. So you could see an incredible amount of detail could be had from a piece of wood. And that was a revelation for Bewick, who realized that this could lead to a lot of innovations, one of them being catalog work. And that's why we have this picture and this block of a skeleton key. So if it wasn't for the invention of wood engraving, which allowed for images to be printed at the same time as typography, you wouldn't have catalogs. And catalogs, of course, led the way to a whole new marketing idea, that you could actually see a picture of the thing before you bought it. And it changed advertising too. It also led to newspaper work that was more interesting. So think the London Illustrated News and Punch magazine. All of these publications, the wonderful thing about them was that they were fully illustrated. And they look like ink drawings. The early engravers were trying to make engravings that looked like they have the free hand of the artist. They didn't want it to look like a woodcut, which is often known as the art of the white line, because it's predominantly an image made of white lines. How so? Because when I carve a line in the block, like so with this graver, I am actually making white lines. If I want a black line, I have to carve 2 white lines. And so there's this whole idea of the art of the white line, being able to recognize the positive and negative space and then to engrave accordingly, to create the illusion of white lines in your image. So here I've carved out a few. This is my block of Algonquin Park. You can see the ink drawing on it. And if I want to see the lines that I've carved, what I usually do is I'll just dump a little bit of talc on here, and I'll just rub it in, and then I can see my lines. You can see them as white lines in there. Here's an engraving I did of Mary Pickford, and you can see I've made some notes on this particular proof about things I wanted to change in the final engraving. The wood I'm not using boxwood, I'm using end-grain maple, Canadian maple. And a lot of the work that I do is about, has Canadian topics, such as this engraving I did recently of Emily Carr called Clee Wick. So this on Canadian maple, and Emily Carr with her bobtails and her dog Ginger Pop and her cats. I think the slant I want to take on the story of Emily Carr is about her animals and her love of animals. And as an artist who's sort of withdrawn from society and totally engaged with nature. And oh yes, that's.
Are you often able to engrave both sides?
Oh, that's a really good point, Jackie. I do. There's a portrait of Emily on this side, and I often will engrave on the other side. The thing to remember is if I'm going to engrave on the other side, I've got to make sure that I don't, and I'm going to just rub some talc into this so you can actually see what I've engraved, is you can't have big open spaces on the other side of the block, otherwise it'll rock on the press and you won't get a good impression. So so I engrave on both sides.
Is that why on this one you had to put tape there because you've got a big gap there? Or
well, no.
It's just part of your make ready?
Yeah, this is just part of my make ready. Is when I put my gauge on this, it was out by a few thou on this side. So
that could be tricky if you had engraved on the side. Or,
So I have some blocks I buy, but most of the blocks I make, and I'm not the best craftsman always. Sometimes I make mistakes. That's where the human side, that's how you can tell I'm not an AI, is because I make lots of mistakes. But I think the important thing about error is to always know how to recover from it. As when I'm talking about bookbinding and making boxes and that, if something goes terribly wrong, I'm more interested in how you solve the problem, right? Than you going around pulling out your hair going, it's over, I can't do anything right, blah, 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 blah. You know, that kind of self-pity doesn't solve the problem, right? You need to engage with the project and go, oh, maybe this is an opportunity for me to create something else or to experiment and to try something else. And that's true on my wood blocks too, because sometimes when I'm engraving my blocks, I'll slip and I'll make a line, or I will get distracted or something, and the block will be damaged. If it can't be fixed and I can't figure out a way of fixing it and I've totally messed it up, then I'll start over. I'll just do another one. I'll start from the beginning again. But I don't mind
It's a beautiful portrait.
working my way through. Thank you. Yeah, I hope it turns out. It's not done yet, but yeah, I should have started.
Draw directly on the plates, or do you transfer images?
Both. I do both. I do transfers and I draw directly on the block. And one thing I do that uses computer technology is if I've got a commission, and the problem with commissions is they want to see it before you do it, right? That's a problem, because if I draw something on the block and then I carve it and make a print and go, here, what do you think? And I go, oh, well, that's great, George, but can you, really, we don't like the hand there. Is there any way that you can move it in a different place? In my last commission, they said, oh, that's great, George, but that picture is a profile. Can you do it head on? We want them face on. It's like, oh, yes, well, we can do that in the AI. We'll just tell it to turn around. But no, I'd have to recarve the whole block. So what I do is I open Photoshop and I will make a file that is a black rectangle the size of the block that I have. And I'll just fill it. I'll do the paint bucket tool and I'll just fill it with black. And then I have an eraser that I can use to draw lines in. But what I discovered is I could scan in my engraving marks into Photoshop and make custom brushes that were the same marks as my tools make. And so I could actually get the exact same thing that my tools make into a file, and then I can send that out and say, okay, is this something? It'll be a bit different when I engrave it because I will make changes as I go. But is this, the ballpark? And if it's a go ahead, then that saves me a lot of time and money. So just that's a sort of a trick that I discovered works fairly well. And then I used Estisol 150 to do a transfer onto the block. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the tools. There are many different types of engraving tools. There are a number of primary ones, and engravers tend to use one tool more than they use another tool. One popular tool, of course, is the lozenge shape graver. And it's very useful, and you can do wonderful straight lines and tapered lines with it, because you can go deep and then go shallow with it to create a lovely tapered line. And you'll notice that on some older engravings, the tapered line was a common way to create shading and to define contour. So this is a popular tool. The other most popular tool that, let me see if I can find it. I should have laid them out so that here we are. It's the spit sticker. Yes, the spit sticker, ladies and gentlemen, a lovely tool that can both create tapered lines, and you can also use this for curves too. And so I love this tool. I use this tool a lot too, especially if I want to make a curve. So if I've got a curve, what I usually do is I hold the block and I turn it. That's why it's up on these pads here. And then I turn the tool into it. So I turn the block to get a curve. The idea isn't to go as deep as possible. The rule is this: the greater the distance between two peaks, the deeper the valley has to be. So if you've got two lines that are really far apart, in order for it not to print the middle part on the press, you really need to have it to be deeper. But if the lines are very, very close together, then they can be very shallow. And as long as your ink is tight on the press, or if you're using hand brayer, as long as the ink is tight, then you can get a lot of detail. So the spit sticker, a wonderful tool, necessary for it. And you could even just, if you're just starting out, this would be a good tool to start with, and the lozenge shape graver. And then the next tool I would tell you to get, I think, would be a scorper. So a scorper looks like this. Remember, the difference between wood engraving and woodcut is that wood engraving is done on the end grain of the wood. So that's where the rings of the tree are, right? Whereas woodcut is done on the plank, which is this side. So with woodcut, you're more likely to get splinters. But with woodcut, you're using woodcut tools, which are chisels and gouges, and those have a space for the material to pass into, whereas the engraving tools do not have that. These are solid tools. And although I would say the scorper, I use it for removing large areas that I want to be white, and it gives you a mark similar to what the gouge would in linocut and woodcut. We use the same tools for linocut as we do for woodcut, so parting tools and gouges. For wood engraving, I'm using spit stickers, scorpers, and lozenge shape gravers or square gravers, and of course the one that everyone wants to hear about as soon as they see it is the lining tool. It's a tool that makes multiple lines all at once. Yes, it's easy. Imagine you were thinking, how does he get those lines so parallel and so close together? Well, I use the lining tool, and you can get lining tools of various lines per inch, and that's great because there's some times where you're thinking, oh, I want it to be very, very subtle, and I want it to have a very light tone. And you might want to have lines that are very, very close together, white lines that are close together. So the other advantage of the lining tool, and this one is a coarse one, and the advantage of this is if I can go one way, like this, then go another way, and then go another way again and create tiny little dots. And that's when you get wonderful things like photographs. So like I said before, by 1850, they could engrave a photograph, and there's Pear's soap, their only want. These poor children. And this engraving from 1899, you can see the kids on the sidewalk. So, just stay there, you little rascals, and we'll take a photo. And they took a photo, and they would then put a photo emulsion onto the wood engraving block, and then a glass plate would have been contact printed onto the block, and the master engravers could then determine with the lining tool what lines should go into that particular area to create that tonal pattern. And we could see that when I show you, like even this key here, which was a commercial key for a catalog, and you could see these parallel lines, absolutely perfect. How did they do those? Well, this was another innovation. They realized that people's hands shake, and the older you get, the more they shake, right? And so that little shake that we all have is hard to control. So they developed a machine called a ruling machine. And the ruling machine could make parallel lines extraordinaire. So if you had something like this and you wanted absolutely parallel lines and you wanted them to fade, you could set up the ruling machine, and it had a little wheel, and you just move the block across. It would hold the tool in the perfect angle and would cut beautiful lines. It could even do the equivalent of what we know as a spirograph, if you remember from the 1970s. Spirograph, fun for kids. Put a pen in there and blah, 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 and you get these mosaic patterns that were quite lovely. So that machine could actually do those things, and so it was great for creating blocks for if you wanted a certificate or something that was fun and formal, a fun and formal border. You could create wonderful borders using the ruling machine. So these skills were acquired by a 7-year apprenticeship. So one would enter an engraving studio, and you would start by getting unimportant things like the floor or something in the background that they know wouldn't be a big disaster if you messed up. And the master engravers would do the faces. So, because you have to remember that a lot of newspaper work, like the London Illustrated News and the Times and whatnot, were all illustrated with wood engravings. And these would have to be done very, very quickly. And so the artists would often draw, or if they had time to do a photograph. Photographs took longer. The artist would make a drawing, and they would give it to the engraver, and the engraver would transfer it onto a block, and then if it was a big one, say the Queen's coronation, and say the block was 12 by 18 or something quite large, the block was bolted together. So they bolt these blocks together. So these blocks were made by master craftsmen, because also remember, letterpress, the blocks have to be type high. 0.918, 918 thousandths of an inch thick. Really important. But so these blocks were made by master craftsmen, bolted together, and then the artist would give the drawing that they would transfer onto it, because remember, everything has to be backwards. So the artist had a drawing that was right reading, and then had to be put onto the block, which is wrong reading. There are many ways to do transfers, and that's a whole other talk, transfers, because there's so many different ways to transfer things, from carbon paper to various types of transfer methods using various other materials. So they'd unbolt these large images, and they distribute them into the engraving studio, and there would be like 30 or 40 engravers, and they would all engrave their little blocks, and they'd be bolted back together to be taken to be made into stereotypes. Oh, where did that word come from? Well, that word, like many words in printing, came from printers, and Sigmund Freud picked it up from there. A stereotype, of course, is when they make a mold from one of the blocks. They never actually printed these blocks. That's why this raised part around the block and this fishing lure, you can see the raised part around here, because that was all removed once the mold was made, and then a plate was mounted onto a block to print. They never actually printed the blocks. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, if you remember, was illustrated by John Tenniel back in 1865. And all of those illustrations were transferred to blocks and were engraved by the DL brothers. And they were Scottish engravers, extraordinary engravers. And they kept the fluid lines of Tenniel's work and engraved all the blocks. And we have the letter. It's in Macmillan's archives, and here you can actually see, look, it looks like an ink drawing. That's the actual size of the wood engraving block. That's on page 19. That's the actual size, and look at the detail of that. So in the 1970s, they opened the vaults at Macmillan, and lo and behold, the Tenniel engraving blocks for Alice in Wonderland were there, and they took those and they printed them directly from the blocks to see, and lo and behold, they couldn't believe the amount of detail that had been lost over the generations and generations of stereotyping. Stereotyping destroys blocks. Anyways, they ended up reprinting these and selling them for a great deal of money. So to collectors, if you can get one of those portfolios, I think they're $3,000 or $4,000. But if you compare it to later editions of Alice in Wonderland, you can see the degradation that happens over the constant making plates from the molds. So stereotyping. They also say things like mind your P's and Q's is also a printer's term, but there's another argument that it came from pubs where, you know, they on the chalkboard they would write P's and Q's, pints or quarts. And so, mind your pints and quarts, buddy. I had a pint, not a quart. You're charging me more, you bugger. And so that's another argument for it. But another thing is a term of frustration, out of sorts, and those typesetters know that. Is when you're out of sorts, it means you didn't have enough P's and Q's to finish the job, and so now you're looking to turn your B's and D's upside down and pretend they're P's and Q's and that kind of thing. So being out of sorts is something that printers know quite well. So I've talked a bit about some of the tools that I use in wood engraving, and the other thing, that the most common question that artists get asked, and you all know this, is like, how long did that take you to make? Why did they ask that? Because they're trying to equate it to like how much they get paid. Like, I make minimum wage, and so how long does that take you to make? Or I work on Wall Street. I make $175,000 a minute. How long did that take you to make? So they want to know. But the actual fact is that there's the time that takes to acquire the skills in order to make the work, but there's also the time it takes in drawing and planning the work, and then there's the time in actually making the work. And the other thing is the actual engraving. The darker the image, the less white in the image, right? the less time it took me to make. So if there's only a few white lines, like this one didn't take me as long as something that has a lot of white in it, because there's a lot more carving involved in something with a lot of white than there is with something that is predominantly black. So if you want, so creating an image that is predominantly black takes you less time.
So you specialize in that because it's quicker?
Quick. I find the quickest way, and then I do the hardest thing that I can find. It's always, I find out, oh, well, I could do it that way, or I could do it this way. I'm going to do it this way. There's something about the challenge of that that I just can't help myself. And of course, you know, the suffering involved in it. Too.
It's basically printmaking in general, right?
Yes.
Compared
Yeah,
to drawing or
that's
painting.
right.
You could just do it, or you could make a print of it.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could just, why not just do a drawing? Why do you need to make a print? So there are all kinds of reasons why we do these things. But if you ask a chef, they would say, you know, there's something to be said about the slow method. There's something that tastes different about food that is taken more time to make.
Care.
Prepared with care and imbued with love. That's something that is acquired, and it's like making food. When you spend more time with the work and you're more engaged with it, there's something more comes off of it, right? So if you've enjoyed making it, it's more likely that will come through, that there will be a sense of joy that's coming out of that. We hope. If not, you know, you need to reconsider what you were mindset. Perhaps that's what it is. So once you've determined that you want to make an engraving and you've got your basic tool, the other most important thing you have to know is they have to be sharp. Do not make engravings with dull tools. Do not even attempt it. It is silly and can cause severe accidents. Remember that if you stab yourself with a sharp tool, it's more likely going to heal faster than if you rip your skin apart with a dull tool. It's why surgeons use knives that are very, 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 very sharp and not dull ones, because there's an efficiency in it, and there's also a less burden, and it takes less work to engrave with a sharp tool than it does with a dull tool.
And it
So
doesn't hurt as much when you do stab yourself.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah, and you might be able to get the bleeding to stop faster because it's not a ragged edge. You might just some pressure for a few minutes can help. So here I brought in a few stones that I enjoy sharpening my engravings with. So here, this of course is an Arkansas stone, and I inherited this from a wonderful engraver and artist named Julius Griffiths, who I used to visit on a regular basis. When he was in his 80s, he and his wife Yalia, and he told me, we'd laugh and talk about art, and he told me secrets about his life, which were very fascinating. So Julius went to England to study Russian during the 1930s and became very good at it. And then in 1942, the British government drafted him MI5, and also noticed that he was very good at drawing. And so they dropped him into the Soviet Union as a spy. And so Julius spent his years as an artist in the Soviet Union, sending information back to MI5. And I said, "Oh, Julius," he says, "George, I can't tell you much about that because I have to take that to my grave, because I swore an oath and I couldn't do that." I said, "Oh, well, Julius, that is the most exciting story you've told me yet. That's so cool." And that's where he met his wife, Yalia. And what he did is every day he'd go out sketching, right? He'd be drawing landscapes. You ever wonder why people like Winston Churchill and Hitler all could draw? Because to be in the military, to be an officer in the British Army, you had to be able to draw. It was a requirement. It was a requirement. And so this is at a time before we came up with this notion that you were gifted. Oh, you're gifted. Some people were just born into it. So you get, if you could draw, you were an asset because you couldn't take a camera into the field. It was too dangerous. So I've just put some oil on here. I should really tell you what I'm doing. So I put some oil on my Arkansas stone, and this is how I clean it, because you notice when I showed you first, it was very dirty with carbon from the tool. And then I'm going to do this in the air so that you can see, but you should be doing it down flat like this. You should hold the tool at the proper angle, so to maintain the angle, and you move it back and forth like this. I also like to true up the angle. That's a physical impossibility to do such a thing. That's crazy. Well, they invented holding devices for sharpening for people who were unsure of their hand. And I brought a Crocker tool. There it is. This is called a Crocker tool, and it is for holding engraving tools at the proper angle so that you can, let's see if I can. So here's my spit sticker. So I would put it in the tool like so, and then this is a water stone. You can see with my water stone. Oil stone, Arkansas's oil stone, Japanese water stone. Beautiful stone for sharpening your tools. The water stone, the advantage of the water stone is it will sharpen faster than the oil stone. The disadvantage of the water stone is it will groove faster than the oil stone. The oil stone will stay true longer, meaning the surface will be flat longer than water stone. Water stone, after a while, will actually get grooves in it. So the Crocker tool, you can set the angle with the Crocker tool, and then you just move it back and forth like this. And you can see the same thing happening, the black line from the tool. With the water stone, you have to soak the stone in water for at least 10 minutes before you start sharpening with it. The oil stone, you can just use right away with oil. The oil stone, you need oil. May not be accessible. Water stone, usually you can find water. So great, faster, but can groove, and you need to have water. Slower sharpening, but lasts longer. Right, and of course they come in various grades. This one is an 800, and you can get them even finer. So this one's 8,000 and 3,000 on one side. So these are for the polishing end of it. Once you get your tool sharp, you want to maintain it that way, and so I am constantly sharpening my tools to make sure that they maintain that keen edge, so that it's less work for me to push it through. Now, don't try to dig a hole in your block when you're engraving. Always remember that it's a light guideline is not a bad idea, so that when you first touch it onto the block, you can just lightly just the surface, and then go back in the line, same place, and then back in again, and then you can slowly get down deeper. That's probably, if you're just beginning, that's how you can learn how to feel out the surface before if you're worried about something not being deep enough. You can also take your tool and just go through it, like this is the scorper, and for these white areas, I don't have to go deep right away. I can just keep going into the same area to dig my lines in there. So the other thing is in my book, plug for my book. Hi, just a word from our sponsor. The Woodcutter's Handbook, written by the demonstrator today, is a book that outlines the tools and techniques needed for creating wood engravings, woodcuts, and lino cuts. So you can find everything from how to make a drawing, how to transfer your drawing to the block, and printing it, as well as many printing methods, all in a single volume, and now available in its third edition. Available at bookstores everywhere. Thank you very much. Whatever was I going to say before that commercial? Sharp tools are a necessity. Once you've got sharp tools, and you've decided what types of lines you want to make. The other thing is, in here for the beginner, learning the angle of attack on the block is an important aspect to it. And that, remember I said the light scratch lines, you can run a line with a pin too. And the other thing is what the marks look like. So having just taking a block and gridding it up and doing different things in each area would be a good way to start. That's what I would suggest you do before you get into a complex image, is learn what marks the tools make, because then you can grid up your block and then make marks in the grid and then print that, and you'll see what the tools can do, and then you can use that as a palette. And you can also keep doing that. Always have a block that you try to experiment with. Remember, for every black line you have to carve 2 white lines. But also, if you want to find out about cross-hatching, you know, this, remember I told you about the lining tool and how you can make tiny dots if you go in different directions. This, and you can even use a piece of chalk if you can't find. I've done this where you just take a piece of chalk and just rub it into the surface and then do this. And you get to see some pretty cool effects that way. Oh, so I've talked a bit about the tools and how to attack various areas of the block. I move all over the block. Sometimes I focus on an area, depends on the music I'm listening to or where my mind wanders to. But I sometimes start at a corner and then I'll go part way and then I'll start at the other corner and then move in. So the methodology of how to engrave can change depending upon your mood and just what you're doing. It's not important anymore to get a high realistic image into a block. All of these things in our time it's not about that. It's about the journey, and it's about trying to put your humanity into the piece of wood, if you can use such a term. And what I love to do is with my engravings is I hand make books. This is my book on Mary Pickford, and I printed this in a limited edition of 35 copies, and this is all printed on a Vandercook, similar to the Vandercooks we have here, and it's all letterpress printed.
All hand set.
This isn't hand set. These are polymers, because I don't have type this small and it would just kill me. Yeah. I have hand set books before. And my God, it's putting it away that I found the most annoying. Yeah. But I don't mind setting like a page or a couple of pages, I'll do. But this is a book pretending to be a silent film. It has intertitles, and it's the life and times of Mary Pickford, who of course was born here in Toronto and grew up here and learned her trade at the Princess Margaret Theatre on King Street, where she toured later the Warrens of Virginia, and that's where she, when she finally got to New York and heard about the flickers and decided to try her skills, because she was a trained theater artist, try her skills in front of a camera, which was a revolutionary new device. Of course, the first ones were the kinetoscope and the kinetograph. And then we got into the projector and the motion picture, which was also known as a persistence of vision. I made only 35 copies of this book because, of course, she worked exclusively on 35 millimeter film. Why did they call it 35 millimeter film? The Americans wanted to call it 1 inch. But the French said, no, it is 35 millimeter. And they won. But interesting. So and of course, I've turned the frame. So normally you view movies like this. I've turned the frame like this. I just thought that would be an interesting thing. And so I do hundreds of engravings for my books. So I've done books on Tom Thompson, Leonard Cohen, and
Trudeau.
Yes, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Conrad Black, and Mary Pickford. And I'm working on Emily Carr. So, she actually auditioned for Disney for the role of Alice in Alice in Wonderland, and she was already in her late 40s, and she wanted to play the 7-year-old Alice. So they screen tested her for it, but they decided not to go for that. So originally Disney had wanted to do live action animation for Alice in Wonderland, but he did it completely in animation. But it's sort of interesting, so I thought, oh, I'll put I don't know if the screen test still exists. It may have vanished. That's her brother Jack. He died. They were all in film, and I did a funeral scene.
Do you just do that based on photographs?
Some of them are photographs, and some of them I made up because there's no photograph of the funeral.
Yeah.
So, but and that's a good point. Is that some of my images are based on photographs, right? And that is to set it into the sense of what is truth. Is there truth in engraving? And we have this sense, and Susan Sontag in her book on photography talked about this notion of truth in photography. Is there truth in photography? Because we know a photograph can lie, but we still use it as documentation to support the truth, right? And so it never can tell the truth because it's always about perspective. As the photograph is always taken from a standing point, and we know that depending upon the standing point you are at the scene of the crime, it looks different. So you might have thought so-and-so was moving their arm to stab them, but actually they were just reaching over to grab them, try to save them. It was another person that you didn't see their arm that actually shoved the knife into them. But it was because of the way the photograph was shot, it makes that person look guilty. And so I'm interested in photography as a witness. And so I think that it supports the narratives that I make by allowing for the witness and then reinterpreting it as a wood engraving. And also I'm interested in that notion of the wood engraving and its history to photography. That many of the early photographs were oh, and there's a drawer in here. And in here I decided to put artifacts. So this is an authentic Mary Pickford silver spoon. Yes, she was born with a silver spoon. Not really, but and then and some nitrate silent film. And I learned that I'm preserving this incorrectly. You shouldn't put it in acetate. I have to remove it from that. And Mary Pickford, the Pickfair, her mansion that she had with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Remember, she invented Hollywood. This is a Canadian invented Hollywood. I don't know why they got. They're so crazy next door. They don't realize we gave them their whole culture. They're obsessed with film. But Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Charlie Chaplin and W.D. Griffith invented United Artists. They started the Academy of Motion Picture Sciences, right? She built the first mansion in Hollywood. She invented it all. She was the richest person in the world by 1914, and there was nobody richer. She would travel around the world and people would think, oh my God, it's Mary Pickford. She speaks fluent French, you know. She speaks fluent Russian. She didn't, but because of all the intertitles, they thought she spoke all those languages. I included this because I know a lot of the stuff I just bought off eBay for nothing. This is a piece of Mary Pickford's clothing. Yeah, it's in a card. And back in the day, cigarette cards were a big thing. And so you buy a pack of cigarettes and you get a movie star. And then a pamphlet from one of her plays. Because, of course, she was first a actress of the stage. And that's why she said she could make the transition to the talkies. And there she is receiving an honorary degree. And this is an old photograph from the newspaper. And it's signed by Mary Pickford. Mm-hmm. So I thought that would be fun. I collected letters that Mary Pickford wrote to her fans and to her friends, and that I bought off eBay and other places, and put them in these drawers as to create this sort of museum piece. And that's what I do with my wood engraving. But I also wrote Graphic Witness, which is a collection of the wood engravers that are my influences, like Lynn Ward, and of course Franz Maserel. And notice Maserel's work, how his wood engravings look like ink drawings, and then compare that to the work of Lynn Ward. Now, Ward went with his wife, May McTerry, who was a children's book author, to Europe for their honeymoon. And that's when he came across the work of Franz Mazurel and decided to bring that back to the United States. And he started to do his, in the 1930s, he did his wordless narratives. He did Vertigo and Madman's Drum, and this is Wild Pilgrimage that I reproduced in here, 1932, New York. A book written entirely in wood engraving. And of course, this is Southern Cross. Oh, no, not Southern Cross. This one is Patry's work on called White Collar. And White Collar is about white collar workers and how during the crash in 1929 they all ended up out of work and they couldn't get work anymore. And also it gets into other social issues like abortion. And then the last one is a Canadian, Lawrence Hyde. Lawrence Hyde took his portfolio of wood engravings. This is his book Southern Cross, reproduced in here. Took his portfolio of wood engravings to the National Film Board. And they said, oh yeah, you're a filmmaker, you're doing storyboards. And he said, here's a camera, go make films. And so that's how he got into filmmaking. He didn't go to school for it or anything. He showed up at the National Film Board with his wood engravings, and they said, yeah, you could do this. And of course, he was banned from the United States because Southern Cross is a criticism of the Americans blowing up the Bikini Atolls. You know the bikini? You know that cute little thing that ladies wear on the beach?
Itsy teeny.
Polka dot bikini. That was inspired by the Bikinians, whose paradise was blown out of the water by the Americans. They blew up an atomic bomb there and displaced them all. Told them that for peace they were going to move them. For peace, we're going to move you all to a island less luscious than the one you're on. And they blew it off the face of the earth. It's still radioactive there today. And Rockwell Kent wrote the introduction to this, an American, and he was blacklisted, of course, in the United States. He left his entire art collection to the Soviet Union. But I went and saw Lawrence Hyde's son, who's Anthony Hyde, who's writes espionage novels. I went to him to ask him to see his tools and what was left because he had passed away, and to get permission to reproduce it in this. So one way to get better at making wood engravings is to look at what other people have done. And by looking at the works of others, you can get inspiration, you can see the tools and techniques that they used and try to emulate some of those ideas. It helps you when you're trying to develop your concepts too, to see what is possible and how you can evolve it. What kind of topics did other engravers work on? What kinds of themes? And where can you take it from there? Is there a way that you can build beyond that? For me, I was interested in I was inspired by first Franz Mazurel, who I saw his work in the 1980s, and I went, I want to do this. I want to make books and novels in pictures. And that's when I realized, well, wood engraving is the perfect medium for that. And that's how I came about it. And I hope that this short introduction into the process of wood engraving allows you a chance to see what the possibilities are, and maybe you'll come to try this and have fun in creating your own engravings.
You've
Thank you.
inspired me.